All right. Ka ʻEHA ke aloha. Eia hoʻia e kuipo I ka uka Iu I ka ua maʻele Holili noe I ke anu O Mauna Kea I ka ʻEHA a ke aloha e kuipo ʻEHA I ka ʻEHA a ke aloha Eia hoʻia e kuipo I ka uka Iu I ka ua maʻele Olili nue I ke anu O Mauna Kea I ka ʻEHA a ke aloha e kuipo ʻEHA I ka ʻEHA a ke aloha So that's the first verse. Yeah? And to understand the story, to understand the story, you have to have the translation of Poliahu. Remember, the song Poliahu talks about the gift of Hanai, when Kekuia Po'iwa Nui gave up her child to be raised by someone else. And as she handed over the child, she said, E noho ana au I ka iu o Mauna Kea, I ka meha meha, e like pū me Poliahu, ka wahine noho mauna. For the rest of my life, I will live at the very summit of Mauna Kea in the cold like the goddess Poliahu. Yeah, what was that thought? She likened ka ha'awi aku I ka hanai, the giving of her child in the tradition of Hanai, to that very line, because she felt that for the rest of her life, until this child became an adult, to know the story, that he would have to live apart from her. And you know, the iu is because Kekuia Po'iwa Nui was treated like an iu in the sense that she was not allowed to raise her children. There are people that are kapu, sacred to their ancestral spirits. These people are called iu. So it references that, yeah, the iu, yeah. And that was exactly why it was written that way. This is an old tradition about the iu. You know, some people can, I mean, it's like everybody could have children. There was no couple on having children, but there was, especially for the upper class, the ali'i and the ali'i kapu, and the ali'i kapu in the aumakua. And this was not only for ali'i, for everyone who had aumakua, that sometimes women could not raise their own children. And that is because certain parts on their bodies were sacred. And we have a tradition called the ʻEHA kapu, where no one can sit on the ʻEHA of some of these sacred women, which meant that they couldn't carry their children and rest them on their thighs because it would bring a catastrophe. These are really, really old traditions and maybe quite difficult for people to understand the traditions. Of course, back then they were closer to the traditions and they have meaning to all of these traditions. And when you speak of the iu and how this separation because of the kapu, even then, there is a lot to the traditions that are so ancient that we have lost that contact. We can talk a little bit about it, but what was the reason? That is wahi ina mona for nokano'ono'ona, food for thought. But the ʻEHA kapu was a tradition. And the ʻEHA, or the lap of these women were prohibited from having any child sit on them. So then and there, these children were taken away to be raised because just in case the mother might forget, lift up the child and put it on her lap, you know, because it was a sacred place for the aumakua, that perhaps the child would get an illness or something would happen. So protective in some sense, but you know, when lawe ia I ka hanai o ke keiki, when the child is given away, there are so many reasons. Nui no nā kumu o ka lawe o ke keiki I ka hanai. One was so that they would be raised away from the royal court. And in the royal court, you know, they practice, assassination by poisoning. People were poisoned in the royal courts. It's something really nobody talks about, but we all know that it happened. And certain ali'i, even up to the time maybe of Kalakaua and Lili'u Kalani, they practiced that tradition. So royal families against royal families. And it's not uncommon. I think it's all over the world. Another reason, the child was not only raised in secrecy because they kept it hidden, and only the most trusted members of the family knew where the child was, but also to, so that the child would be raised with compassion, knowing what it is to be raised without the many things that were privileges of those raised in the royal court. So they wanted them to have this compassion for their people. They had to learn how to fish. They had to learn how to farm. They had to learn the difficulties of the common people. And then in that way, when they became rulers, they would know and understand what their people are living with and are going through. So understanding that story, and it ends with the child being given, now comes this story, the second story that was written. And it's about the very moment that the child is being taken away and the emotions that she's having, and then recognizing herself as being a part of this tradition of the iu. So she says, here I am, ʻEHA, you know, of course it's a love song, and that's the story I'm using between Poliahu and Aiwohi Kupua, but the sweetheart is really her child. That is the sweetheart, her child. Ika uka iu iu, and hide. Well, that is the separation of the two, that he will always be there and she will always be in that separation, because that's what the tradition more or less demanded. What tradition? The tradition of Hanai, the tradition of Iu, the tradition of Omakua, the traditions of the royal court, not to mention the mother's family's traditions and the father's family's traditions, and the kapu system itself. So it was more than just one thing. There were several things that more or less guided that process. Meka ua ma'e ele, Olilinoe, the ua ma'e ele, the rains that are so cold that they're kind of numb. You know, you're so cold, your skin is numb, you know, almost frozen. Ika ua ma'e ele o Lilinoe, the benumbing rains, yeah, the icy cold rains of the goddess Lilinoe, who is a sister to Poliahu. Some say a daughter to Poliahu. Ike anu, in the cold of Mauna Kea. You know, and just the words iu and Mauna Kea and ma'eele and anu are reflections of the moment in time, the many emotions. Another person needs to talk to me and will say, after class, good. And so you can gain some insight by understanding just the way that I'm putting out these very decorative words, words that reflect like beautiful flowers. And more than anything else, what I shared with our class this morning, ka ʻEHA ke aloha, that ka ʻEHA ke aloha, that was the name that my teacher gave to me, ka ʻEHA ke aloha. Not because love was so painful, but for me, love was so overwhelming that it brought this, I don't want to say pain, although I use the word pain, but you know how you say, oh, love is so great, it makes my heart sore. That pain and that line, remember that line, love is so great, it makes my heart sore. The other name she gave me was Kaluhia ke aloha. And Kaluhia ke aloha is love is so overwhelming that I'm exhausted. I didn't write that song yet. It's coming, it's on the way. Kaluhia ke aloha. So what was this all about? Auntie Emma, through the years I worked with her, would call me by these many different names at different times in my growth. Yeah? Kupu me ke kupuna. Ke kupu ana a ka ike no e au me nā kupuna. And so throughout the growing, to mark a rite of passage from this understanding and this knowing to the next level of understanding and knowing. And for each level, it was like a graduation. So uniki was kalehua o kahula. At each time of my growth, I was given another name. So Kawai Kapu o Kalani started it, the sacred waters of the heavens. Kako o mai o io o nalani nui a mamau was as I started my training, I was her assistant. We call kako'o. In all the ceremonies she did, I was the kako'o. Ka ʻEHA ke aloha, that came as I started to see Auntie wanted to legally adopt me. My name would have been Kawai Kapu'okalani DeFries. And the day she asked me, and I sat and I cried, and it was about my responsibilities and obligations to my father, Alexander Kapili Aloha Hewitt. And although my father had passed away, I still had that sense, that great sense of commitment to that love of my father. And that's Ka ʻEHA ke aloha. And that's when that took place. Later on, as I took more kuleana onto myself, and she saw me being responsible for all the things that she was teaching me, she said, it's going to be overwhelming. And that's when she gave the name Kaluhia ke aloha. No different from when Auntie Iolani called me Ku'ulei of Apuhi, my lei of Avapuhi blossoms. Because if you look at the blossom of the Avapuhi, it looks like a heart and its chambers. And that's what I was to her, this person that has so much heart I put into everything that I do. And then there was, of course, the sweet fragrance. Yeah. And this is why after all these years, that's why I still get time for Kaluhia ke aloha, because after all these years, I still have time to write. So, you know, Ku'ulei Avapuhi. And that is a song that she would sing to me all the time. Au he ala oe e ke aloha. Avapuhi pala o ka ua no. A e ia no mea. I ka poli ke aloha. E ku aloha e o. Au he ala oe e ia noa. A huli aku a ia. Yes, and that's how we would begin our time together in the study of hula. All these different names to mark rites of passages, to mark the movement from one place to the next place with ike no'eau, knowledge and skill, but to also mark the pilina, the connection, like giving birth, and you name that event to commemorate, to remember. And when you hear that name or you call that name, you remember that. And you wear, like a hakumele is a lei of words. Yeah, you wear those names like all these beautiful leis. Yeah. Lei mele inoa, lei inoa, a lei of beautiful words that are your lei, your lei of words that were composed just for you, this life that is there in the mana of those words, yeah? Ai ka olelo keola, ai ka olelo kamake, mana ka leo, mana ka olelo o na Hawaii. So you're wearing this beautiful lei of words in this life force that comes through those words that came from the mouth of your kupuna, your teacher. And now that becomes a part of you. in that pilina, in that ho'ohali'ali'a, in that mo'o olelo, and in that mo'o ku'auhau. So this is how ka ʻEHA ke aloha came into its being. This intangible existence of words that are there. And the power, the mana, o ke'ia mau hua'olelo of these words are there, cannot be seen, it can be felt. And this is why inoa are so very important, because when they are given, they should come with great intent and great blessings. Yeah. Lei inoa, that you wear the inoa like a lei. Lei inoa.